The 2020 election is over and it's finally inauguration day. Trump's out, Biden's in, and the Democrats are taking over full control of Congress. Now, the important question in my mind is, how will this affect average Americans who are more concerned with putting food on their table, having a roof over their head, and being able to pay their bills than dealing with the partisanship and the bickering that has overtaken Washington? My name is Stuart Sandweiss. I'm a CPA, I'm an attorney, and I'm director of the Legal Education Center, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to helping consumers learn about legal and financial issues so they can make informed, responsible choices in order to protect themselves and thrive. Now, many reports say that our country is in a crisis. And I don't mean a political crisis or a constitutional crisis. I'm talking about a financial crisis. While the stock market is at an all-time high, the problem is that a lot of people don't have any stock. But a lot of people do have a lot of consumer debt. And that's why consumer debt is also at an all-time high. Some reports say it's as high as $15 trillion nationwide. This means that the average American is over $90,000 in debt, including mortgages, car loans, medical bills, credit cards, personal loans, and of course, student loans, which nationwide total over $1.6 trillion, and where it's estimated that over 10% of the people with outstanding student loans are delinquent and behind. Due to the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, this issue is coming to a head very quickly. The question is, where are we headed? Up until now, there's been a clash between the Democrats, who are looking for major reforms in consumer laws and bankruptcy laws, and the Republicans, who seem to be more inclined to protect banks and big businesses. So we're clear, I'm not here to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of either side's positions or arguments. Much of this is rooted in political ideology, and quite frankly, I'm not here to weigh in on that. Rather, in this video, I want to talk about some of the things that I expect will happen, right or wrong, once Joe Biden is sworn in as president and the Democrats take over full control of Congress. I base my predictions on a bill that was introduced in December 2020 by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Jerry Nadler. It got some, but not a lot of press. And while it died at the end of the 116th Congress, I fully expect that their bill will be reintroduced and acted upon very soon, once the Democrats gain full control of the government. The bill was nicknamed COBRA, which stands for the Consumer Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2020, now 2021, and it proposed some of the most sweeping reforms of the bankruptcy system in over 15 years, since what is now known as BAP-CIPA, the 2005 law, formerly known as the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act. If this new bill becomes a law, you can expect many changes in the bankruptcy code. For example, currently, people who qualify for a Chapter 7 discharge can discharge all of their debts through a Chapter 7 case. People whose income is too high or they've got non-exempt assets to protect, and people who are behind on their home mortgage and want to keep their house can file what's called a Chapter 13, which is a repayment plan where they repay some or all of their debts over a 3 to 5 year period. Under the proposed Bankruptcy Reform Act, Chapter 7 cases and Chapter 13 cases will be replaced by a new unified Chapter 10, which, similar to the current system, would provide two options for consumers who owe less than $7.5 million. One route would be to allow consumers to wipe out all of their unsecured debts, similar to a Chapter 7, except for child support or for fraud issues. But it would still require a minimum payment by people who have valuable assets or whose annual income is over 133% of the median income for their state. The second option under the new system would be through a repayment plan similar to what now occurs in a Chapter 13. However, unlike the current system, the new plan would focus on whether consumers have sufficient funds to make minimum payments, which is based upon their income and their non-exempt assets, as opposed to allowing cases to be dismissed because a consumer chose to spend their money on what they call luxury items, such as expensive vehicles or payments for their adult children or private school tuition. Either way, the new plan would eliminate the credit counseling requirement that Congress enacted in 2005, where prior to filing bankruptcy, a person has to take an online or telephone credit counseling course. It would also allow consumers to pay their attorneys over time, even in discharge-type cases. It would also allow people to appear remotely for their 341 meetings, which started, of course, during the pandemic. And it would also allow them to appear at times that do not conflict with their work schedules. Some of the biggest and most important proposed changes concern the housing crisis. Now, recent government estimates show that over a third of the country, over 100 million Americans live in rental properties, either houses that they rent or apartments. And concerned with the spread of COVID-19 for people who could not afford to pay the rent and were going to get evicted, in September 2020, the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, issued what we call an eviction moratorium. That means they stopped all evictions nationwide, provided that the tenant, the person who's renting the house or apartment, gives their landlord an affidavit that says they've been affected by COVID-19 and can't afford to pay the rent. And it's limited to people who earn less than $99,000 a year or $198,000 for a married couple. Now, that eviction moratorium expired at the end of, from the CDC, expired at the end of December 2020. When Congress passed the budget and President Trump signed it, it extended that protection until the end of January 2021. I expect that once the new Congress convenes under the new administration, I expect, my gut feeling is that they're going to extend it. However, at some point, this protection, this eviction moratorium is going to end, and the courts are going to start processing the backlog of eviction cases against people who fell behind on the rent during the pandemic. Under the current law, renters who file Chapter 7 bankruptcy cases after a landlord gets an eviction judgment against the tenant, they only get a 30-day stay, meaning that after 30 days, the landlord can continue the eviction case and have the renter removed from the residence unless the debtor, the tenant, catches up on the back rent, or unless they're able to catch up on the back rent, and they deposit any rent that becomes due within 30 days after the bankruptcy case is filed, which I will tell you as a practical matter almost never happens, because if someone had that kind of money, they wouldn't be in danger of eviction and they wouldn't be filing bankruptcy. Renters who owe money for periods of time before they file bankruptcy can discharge the amounts owing, so they won't have to ultimately pay for it. But in order to do so, they're going to have to move out of the residence. Timing is very important under the current law. And if you're in that situation, you want to consult a competent bankruptcy attorney for the current law before the landlord files the eviction case against you. Under the new proposed law, a renter would be able to file bankruptcy and continue to live in their rented house or apartment with the ability to discharge up to 6 months of rent. Big win for consumers, not good for landlords. The new proposed law also provides protections for homeowners who are behind on their mortgage. Currently, a homeowner can file a Chapter 13 case and propose a plan to repay the arrearage on their mortgage over a 3 to 5 year period while they continue to make their current mortgage payments. However, for many people, this is extremely difficult. Under the new proposed Chapter 10 law, homeowners would be allowed to modify their mortgage based on the market value of their property with reduced interest rates, similar to a mortgage modification. Unlike the current Chapter 13 law, though, under the proposed new Chapter 10, a mortgage company would not be able to take action against a consumer who defaults on a repayment plan unless the consumer is at least 120 days past due on the repayment plan. Another big change under the proposed bankruptcy law concerns student debt, which, as I said earlier, is over $1.6 trillion nationally. Under the current system, most, but not all, student loans are non-dischargeable, meaning that even if a borrower files bankruptcy and they get a discharge of their debts, they still will have to pay back their public student loans for education at what we call Title IV schools, unless they can show what's called an undue hardship. And I will tell you that this is extremely difficult to prove. Under the proposed law, all student loans would be dischargeable, similar to any other unsecured debts like credit cards and medical bills. Moreover, whether or not someone files bankruptcy, there are rumors that Congress will waive anywhere between $10,000 and $50,000 of student loan debt per person. And there's also a proposal floating around that will improve some of the repayment options that exist, including programs to cancel certain loans for people who work for the government or work for nonprofit entities. Additionally, unlike the current Chapter 13, where a person receives a discharge at their end of their 3 to 5 year repayment period, under the proposed new Chapter 10 law, a consumer would receive a discharge as soon as the bankruptcy court approves their payment plan. if they're required to have a payment plan, and this would allow them to start rebuilding their credit right away, as opposed to having to wait 3 or 5 years until they make all of their plan payments and receive a discharge. The new proposed law would also eliminate the 60-day waiting period in a discharge case, where currently a debtor has to wait 60 days after their 341 meeting of creditors to receive a discharge. Instead, under the new proposed law, consumers who have few assets and don't have enough income to require a repayment plan would get a discharge right away, eliminate that 60 days. The proposed law also seeks to expand some consumer safeguards. For example, while collection companies are not supposed to attempt to collect debts that are past the statute of limitations, many often do, as there's no penalty imposed against a company who violates the law. This has led to many problems for consumers. For example, some people are tricked into what we call restarting the clock by making a payment on a debt that they legally do not have to pay, which puts the debt back within the statute of limitations. Other times, consumers are tricked into paying debts that they legally do not have to pay. It's also a problem in Chapter 13 repayment bankruptcy cases where companies file claims and it's up to the consumer, the debtor, to object to the claims. When this happens under the current law, consumers have no recourse other than having to pay attorneys to defend them. Under the proposed new law, a collection company who attempts to collect what we call a stale debt, a debt that's past the statute of limitations, would be liable for damages under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which also requires the company who violates the law to pay the consumer's legal fees. While Congress still has to debate and vote on all of the specific changes to the bankruptcy laws, it seems likely that under a Biden administration with a Democratic Congress, some or all of these changes will become law in the not too distant future. If you've got any questions about any of these issues or need personal advice on any debt-related issues, please feel free to call me, shoot me an email, and I will be glad to meet with you and to help you. For more debt-related information, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ditch Your Debt, or join our Facebook group by going to ditchyourdebt.com. That's ditchurdebt.com. You can also use the link below to download our free guide on how to eliminate debt, get a 720 credit score, and save thousands of dollars without losing your property.